Under motions other than government motions, motion 511, Mr. Westhead.
Honourable member from Banff Cochrane.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am delighted to move motion 511. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge the government to increase its efforts to conserve and manage public lands in Alberta's headwater regions to optimize downstream water security for future generations of Albertans. Before I begin, I'd like to start by thanking everyone who has written to my office, expressing their support for the motion, and those who helped me craft it. I'd also like to thank members of this Assembly for granting unanimous consent to discuss this very important issue. Mr. Speaker, it is a true honour to be discussing the topic of water here in the Legislature again today. Previously in this chamber, I described water as a common denominator. The United Nations has declared that clean drinking water is indispensable for leading a life in human dignity and is a prerequisite for the realization of other human rights. Mr. Speaker, here in Alberta, most people would say that our water comes from rivers originating in the majestic Rocky Mountains. But more accurately, as author and naturalist Kevin Van Tighem points out, water doesn't come from the river, it comes to the river, which is an important distinction that the motion we have before us is predicated on. That is, a river is a product of its watershed. It is the landscape that produces the water, which in turn determines water quantity, quality, and its rate of discharge. Therefore, the way we manage our public lands has a direct relationship to Alberta's water security. The eastern slopes of our province is where nature lives, and also where the water we all rely on begins its journey. Indeed, the Gravel Bed River is the ecological centre of nature, and its resilience relies on the degree to which this ecosystem remains intact. Members can refer to the research paper on this topic I tabled earlier today for more information on the importance of gravel bed rivers. One of the world-leading experts on water security is Bob Sanford, a constituent of Banff Cochrane. Mr. Sanford is the EPCOR Chair for Water and Climate Security at the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. For many years, Mr. Sanford has clearly and unequivocally articulated that in order to effectively respond to a changing climate, we must take the domain of water management seriously. That is, climate change mitigation is about carbon, but climate change adaptation is about water, and therefore we must follow the water. When I spoke to Mr. Sanford about this motion, he also suggested that not only does the way we manage and conserve public lands relate to water security, it also relates to climate stability. Our opposition colleagues across the aisle remain skeptical about the scientific consensus of anthropogenic climate change, but there is a significant cost if we were to accept the wild roses do-nothing approach. You see, Mr. Speaker, water and climate are reflections of one another. Management of one of these aspects effectively means we are managing the others. The energetic processes involving climate are intimately coupled with the water cycle. A case in point is the way in which our glaciers act as a thermostat for North America. Alberta is fortunate to have some of the most significant headwaters in Western Canada, with many of those located in Banff Cochrane. This presents Alberta an unparalleled opportunity to demonstrate leadership, not only for taking action to confront climate change, but also in terms of following land use management best practices. These crucial watersheds also represent a massive responsibility that we owe to future generations who will judge us by the decisions we make today to ensure their water supply is secure in the future. During my consultation on this motion, I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. John Pomeroy, who conducts his research in Kananaskis country. Dr. Pomeroy is the Canada Research Chair in Water Resources and Climate Change, Professor of Geography and Director of the Centre for Hydrology at the University of Saskatchewan. The basis of Dr. Pomeroy's research is that alpine catchments receive and produce a disproportionately large fraction of global precipitation and runoff. Given that snow and ice dominate the behaviour of alpine hydrology, these indicators are especially sensitive to climate warming. The significance of his research is based on the understanding that the sensitivity of alpine hydrology to changing high elevation climate is of disproportionate importance to downstream water resources. Indeed, Dr. Pomeroy has demonstrated that ongoing climate change in mountain climate has resulted in shorter snow cover duration, earlier spring hydrographs, greater rainfall as a fraction of total precipitation, glacier volume decline, ground thaw, and woody vegetation increase in many alpine catchments, with some alpine catchments contributing to higher frequency of floods and/or droughts. A conclusion that can be drawn here is that a concerted global effort is needed to address how changing high mountain hydrological processes will mediate the influence of atmospheric change in alpine catchments. Furthermore, mountain stream flow is shifting in timing and magnitude due to complex interactions of climate change with hydrological processes governed by vegetation, geology, and topography. A valued partner in the stewardship of Alberta's mountain ecosystems is the nonprofit organization Yellowstone to Yukon, with its headquarters located in Canmore. Y2Y does this work in part because they know that Alberta's mountain headwaters provide water for millions of people, deliver important natural services such as flood and drought control, provide critical habitat for wildlife, and offer abundant recreation opportunities. Y2Y points out that while some of our headwaters and surrounding habitat are protected, many are not. Y2Y founder Harvey Locke and Alberta Program Director Stefan Legault would like to see the Alberta government increase its efforts to keep our mountain watersheds healthy and intact. Mr. Speaker, as the world experiences and prepares for the effects of a changing climate, it is also critical for our continued economic prosperity that we ensure Alberta's supply of fresh water can meet our future demands. To illustrate the importance of this on a global context, I'd like to once again turn to the work of Mr. Bob Sanford, who points out that the primary response to climate change has been to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, while this is necessary, it is also inadequate by itself. In concert with reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we must also take efforts to adapt to the current and anticipated effects of climate change as it relates to water. Mr. Sanford goes on to describe that the convergence of trends relating to both global food shortages and water scarcity will have implications for Alberta's economy. Climate change impacts can extend rapidly far beyond ranges of variability and can also become permanent. The term to describe hydrological patterns in relation to geography is known as stationarity. The lesson for Alberta in all of this, Mr. Sanford proposes, is that we should take neither water demand nor hydrological stationarity for granted. In the future, the favoring of virtual water exchanges in the form of food exports could greatly advantage Alberta's agricultural sector, but, and this is the crucial point, only if we are able to address issues relating to land use practices as they relate to water. Clearly, this is an important policy matter whereby we can position Alberta to continue to be a leader in agricultural exports, in addition to taking action on climate change and water security. To do that, we must ensure our decisions are consistent with long-term water security in order to respond to a changing climate. What is required, Mr. Sanford implores, is proactive, well-informed, and visionary political leadership. Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity to provide that type of visionary political leadership here in the chamber today. Climate change is real. This government has positioned itself as a leader in taking action against climate change through our Climate Leadership Plan. That is something to be proud of, but there is more that we can do to ensure our province remains prosperous as our climate changes. We simply must ensure Alberta's water future is secure. There is no question that our public lands and watersheds play a key role in determining water quantity and quality. Therefore, conserving and managing our public lands in Alberta's headwater regions with a view to optimizing downstream water security for our future is a critical and worthy pursuit. I look forward to the debate on this motion this afternoon and urge all members to support the motion. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members of this Assembly know, water security is vital to the health and well-being of Albertans and to our long-term environmental sustainability. The mission of our Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program is to, quote, build long-term watershed resiliency for flood and drought mitigation, by improving natural watershed functions and engaging stakeholders in the conservation, restoration, enhancement, and stewardship of priority watersheds." End quote. The grants will go towards such projects as the restoration of riparian areas, creation of wetlands, installation of rain gardens in urban locations, soil bioengineering, implementation of agricultural best management practices, and the increased use of beaver structures. This program has provided $18.5 million in funding to 35 projects which support healthy watersheds, many of which are located in Alberta's headwaters and help optimize downstream water security for future generations of Albertans. The program has supported Western Sky Land Trust's Bow and Beyond initiative to meet with over 200 riparian landowners this year in the Bow River Basin upstream of Calgary, which has led to 1,660 acres of riparian land being secured for conservation in the Ghost watershed. And 4,565 acres are in the stage of negotiation and will be secured for conservation, and an additional 11,700 acres being considered for conservation by riparian landowners. Over 12 kilometres of riparian lands are being restored and enhanced in the Jumping Pound Creek watershed and in the headwaters of the Old Man River Basin. Through Cows and Fish and Forest Research Institute research, we are assessing the riparian areas in the southeastern slopes, which will help us to target effective land restoration and conservation in future grant rounds. And through the ALCES watershed simulation model, we are identifying areas where conservation and restoration will have the best results for watershed resiliency. Further, our drinking water safety plans address risk associated with source water. Mr. Speaker, a healthy watershed is our first and arguably best defense against flood and drought. If appropriately managed, Alberta's natural watershed systems will help mitigate severe natural events and will provide many other ecological benefits. Improving natural watersheds is an important part of our plan to help vulnerable communities like Calgary and others across the province adapt to a changing climate. These projects will enhance our natural environment and reduce the impact of both floods and drought. The Director of Water Resources at the City of Calgary affirms that, quote, "The City of Calgary is pleased to hear that the province is moving ahead with additional watershed resiliency and restoration program projects in the Bow and Elbow River watersheds. We are grateful for the support Calgary received in the previous round of funding, which recognizes the important role riparian areas play in the health of the rivers, streams, and creeks we all depend on. Mr. Speaker, our government is working to ensure Albertans have confidence that amidst a changing climate, our most essential water resources are protected and managed for current and future generations." Mr. Speaker, I think regardless of if we believe in man-made climate change or not, we can't deny that the world's supply of water is dwindling. Our lakes, rivers, and aquifers are getting lower and lower, and there's extreme drought all over the world, especially in areas that didn't cause climate change, like Africa. There are areas in Africa where people have been living for thousands of years, and now, because of the lack of water, their families can't live there anymore. It's not sustainable. The land is like sand or ash. Nothing will grow there, and it just blows away in the wind. What this also does is causes massive climate migrations. Hundreds of thousands of people who have to leave their homes because they can't survive on their traditional lands. Mr. Speaker, we are lucky because we live in a land that has a lot of fresh water. We have an abundance right now, but we need to be careful. We need to manage our resources properly, and I think this motion speaks to that. I am very much in favor of it. It's a balancing act when humans are dealing with our watershed issues, and it's something that we need to conserve over time. And it's not just about us, Mr. Speaker. It's about all the species that we have, to be honest, under our care in this province and in this country. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you to the member for his motion, and I support it wholeheartedly. Thank you, Speaker.
Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased to rise in support of this motion. It's an easy motion to support. It's our lifeblood, after all. The eastern slopes provide all the water to Alberta and to the rest of the prairie provinces, in fact, and it's the source of all life and productivity, whether it's agricultural or industrial. So it's very clear that this really should be a higher priority than it has been for decades. Peter Lougheed, back in the 70s, established an Eastern Slopes policy that actually restricted industrial and commercial activity on the eastern slopes. And somehow over time that has gradually fallen away, and we're in a state now of where the designated areas for protection have not only become, what would I say, thwarted or incompletely implemented, certainly misunderstood, and certainly violated by past governments since Peter Lougheed. And all manner of development has gone on now in the eastern slopes that not only threatens the quality of our water and the cost of our cleaning the water in Calgary, for example, but all urban areas downstream of the mountains have to spend more and more dollars to clean the water because not only of more depositions from erosion, but also industrial and agricultural, even recreational use up there. Certainly the logging has added to the erosion and the loss of capacity to control high levels of flow, or as the honourable member from Banff Cochrane mentioned, control the flow for drought circumstances as well. Brad Stelfox is a neighbour and an advisor, has been an advisor to me for a decade, and he has visited most environment and agriculture ministers since I got into this legislature, presented his ALCES model, which is recognized around the world as a wonderful visual indication of cumulative impact over many decades of development, and has helped us get a sense of just how the pace of our development is threatening not only our water supplies but our industrial activities and all manner of activities that we are associating with economic development. So by failing to manage the eastern slopes, we are failing to manage our economy in a very fundamental way. And it's a reminder that the economy is a subset of the environment. It's not the other way around. If we don't preserve the environment, we do not have an economy, and certainly we do not have our health. Three levels of importance to water: not only the quality, not only the quantity of water, but the in-stream flow needs, the so-called adequate volume that has to be maintained in streams and rivers for life to be supported there. Fish life, plant life, animal life, all of these require a minimum in-stream flow, which is threatened every fall. And with the glaciers being limited further and further as the years go by, there is a real threat, especially in southern Alberta, which has been known as the desert in past generations. The desert part of Alberta, the area that early explorers felt was uninhabitable and potentially desert, has been close to that, especially through the Depression. We cannot assume anything for our future, especially with the unpredictability of climate change and the extremes that we can expect in terms of rain and water loss. So those are some of the key elements of this. It's one thing, though, to pass a motion that is motherhood. It's another thing to actually put in place clear limits to activities and zones of development and protection against development. And I applaud the honourable member's efforts to highlight this yet again. And it is, in my time, 12 years in the legislature, this is probably the fourth or fifth time that it's been highlighted. And it needs now to move on to much more substantive protection measures, bills, I would argue, regulations. Off-highway vehicles have been a big issue in the eastern slopes that continue to be a damaging factor, especially in southwestern Alberta, but I think on up the eastern slopes it's going to be a growing problem as we get I think Alberta has the most off-highway vehicles per capita of anywhere in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps not the Northwest Territory, but we are increasingly using off-highway vehicles for recreation use in the mountains, and it's causing very substantial impacts. So I would welcome the chance to move this forward in the next phase to some very clear guidelines beyond what the South Saskatchewan River Basin Plan has done. It has made some steps towards limiting development and identifying protection areas like the park and wildland that have been established in southwestern Alberta, but I think it's clear that we have to do more in relation to better logging practices, designating trails for off-highway vehicles instead of letting people go wherever they want, wherever there's a trail, and designating recreational use, which is a tremendous possibility for our future economic development. The recreational, tourism, film industry out in the mountains has to be a long-term economic driver for us, which will have the side benefit, of course, have that as a side benefit, the primary benefit being, of course, protection of quality and quantity of water for all of us, and for, indeed, recreational activities such as fishing and so on. So if any area of the province is absolutely dependent on better eastern slopes management, it's the south part of this province. We don't have a lot of water here. Most of our water is in the north. Most of our population and demands are in the south. It's very clear from all the reports that this member has referred to and others that we neglect this at our peril. There have been no new water licenses issued since 2006. That's 10 years ago we realized we'd reached the limit of our water capacity. So surely that's the writing on the wall that says, folks, we've gone too far, too fast. And especially in southern Alberta, this has to be the primary focus of policies on the eastern slopes, is water protection for the future. So with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Calgary-Lougheed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to rise to speak to motion 511 as brought forward by the member from Banff Cochrane. Now, on the surface, this motion seems fairly innocuous. Everyone wants to protect public lands, and water security is extremely important. I think we can all agree to that. However, the concern of our caucus and Albertans beyond these walls is that unintended consequences are once again quite reliably rearing their ugly head. While I expect that the member has the best intentions in mind, and I truly believe that, there are serious implications if the government starts to go down a road such as this. And that's because a motion such as this, if acted upon and turned into government policy, could have serious implications for the mining of metallurgical coal in Alberta. This is because the 8 metallurgical coal projects in Alberta are primarily along the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. And I'm sure everyone in this House and beyond knows that there's a huge difference between metallurgical coal and thermal coal, at the feet of which this government lays many societal ills. Metallurgical coal is used in steel making and is a significant export product sold around the world to economies that are growing and urbanizing at an increasingly rapid rate. And ironically enough, because metallurgical coal is needed to make steel, it's also needed to make wind turbines, which this government would so desperately like to see in every field across Alberta. Now, these 8 metallurgical coal projects on the eastern slopes have the potential to generate between $10 and $13 billion in government revenue. Along with these dollars, which are obviously significant, these projects are able to directly employ between 3,000 and 4,000 people. And there's a potential for an additional 8,000 to 12,000 indirect jobs as well. So, like so many Albertans who care about both the economy and the environment at the same time, I feel that we can balance these by enforcing very strict environmental standards, while also creating the jobs that Albertans so desperately need now and on an ongoing basis. Mr. Speaker, these are thousands of good mortgage-paying jobs, and these projects often form the main source of direct and indirect employment in their respective communities. And I just wonder if the member has taken the opportunity to speak with any of the companies which mine metallurgical coal or perhaps the Coal Association of Canada to inquire about the impacts this motion potentially has on their operations. And I'm wondering this. I wonder if, member, what is not currently being done that the member would like to be seeing done going into the future? I know that companies that work in headwater regions are already subject, as they should be, to very stringent regulations, sets of them, which govern how they're allowed to operate in these areas. So by stating that the government should increase its efforts to conserve and manage public lands, the member is clearly calling into question what is being done at this moment in time. So has the member indeed consulted with the Ministry of the Environment? Because I would have thought that this would have been within her purview to act upon this already within regulations currently set. What additional steps need to be made that are not already being made? I think we need to know that. We all want to protect the water. Again, Alberta has very strict environmental regulations. Albertans expect that, and they have every right to, Mr. Speaker. So I am interested to know what additional actions the member is calling for and what specific problems he is looking to remedy. Because if there are instances of comprised water quality, Albertans already expect that the Department of Environment and Parks is doing everything that is in their power, and they have great powers to remedy these situations already. Now, these individuals, which up until May 2015 included an individual who's now a Minister of the Crown, if I'm not mistaken, they do great work. That's an honest, sincere compliment. And I have the deepest of confidence in their abilities, as I had confidence in their abilities when they were with the previous government, to take action when it was needed and to suggest policy and legislative changes when they were deemed necessary. So, in closing, Mr. Speaker, this motion, definitely, credit where credit is due, well intended. But the problem is that it has potential to prevent the creation of thousands of jobs in Alberta at a time when our province desperately needs them, while respecting the environment with the regulations that are already in place. Metallurgical coal, as I've said, is required around the world, especially in economies that are growing at an accelerated rate, and this motion has the potential to cut all of that off at the knees, selling a high-quality product into a market that already has an increasing level of demand. So that is nonsensical in my understanding, Mr. Speaker, and when I say the word redundant, it is not meant as an insult at all, but some would say the motion is redundant because there is all sorts of great work that's already being done by ministry officials with the capacities that they already possess. So for these reasons and more, Mr. Speaker, the motion falls short. I can't support it. I encourage all other members of this Assembly to vote against it and do something different and better on a different occasion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that well-managed land and water systems will help our communities and industries to adapt to a changing climate where severe weather will be more common. And I've had the privilege to see a lot of the world's great river. I've seen how destroyed and how polluted the Charapur River and going through Thailand has been, how the Mekong is becoming sus, and how the Ganges is already polluted. I've also seen what happens to some of our great rivers in the north, like the Mackenzie River, and how we fought really, really hard to protect its source and all its riverbank. Water is one of the most important resources that we have. Alberta has some of the most significant headwaters in Western Canada. Protecting those headwaters will ensure our environmental and economic prosperity well into the future. Alberta's three top industries, oil sands, agricultural and forestry, rely on having a stable and secure source of water. If we put our water security at risk, then we are putting our most important industries at risk as well, and we just can't afford to do that. I think that all MLAs were gifted by a book called Living in the Shed, authored by Billy Milholland, which details the headwaters of the North Saskatchewan River within the Banff National Park to its watershed up to the border with Saskatchewan. And I would urge all MLAs to read the book and to discover the importance of our agricultural, forestry and oil and gas industries along this river. The book also details the fauna and flora, the important settlers, and the indigenous settlement and trading and trapping areas that have depended on the river. I personally learned a lot about the importance of this river through this book and how important the preservation of our public land and watershed through the research by these authors. And I also know how important the river is to the industry and how they value the preservation of the water through the action that they take in how they build the industries along the North Saskatchewan River. Along with 3 other MLAs, I was privileged to go down the North Saskatchewan headwaters, and the trip was organized by the North Saskatchewan River Watershed Alliance. We were asked to meet in Rocky Mountain so we could meet our host and guides. So I was looking forward to a wonderful day drifting down the river in a canoe powered by the river and my guide. Instead, myself and the other MLAs had a wonderful day learning to paddle, ride rapids, learn about the currents, the conservation challenge, the conservation challenge for the river and its watershed, and the work of community groups who watch out for the river. We learned also as to the way that the river changes year by year and the regions of the cliff. The MLA for Edmonton Southland and myself had a very close call with finding how cold the river was when the tree whose roots had been eroded from the cliff starting to fall just as we were underneath. There were some jokes along the canoes, and we were wondering if someone maybe from the opposition had been watching our canoes and had caused the cliff to fall. But the importance of the trip was that we learned about the history and the importance of its watershed, and we discovered who had been the first settlers down the river. I know I can speak for the other MLAs who were on this trip about how impressed we were with community groups' initiatives to preserve the watershed. In particular, Clearwater County has begun a program to limit the use of OHV vehicles in sensitive areas by using the Sasquatch to indicate which areas were off-limit to OHV vehicles. On the canoe trip, we also met with environment and park staff who talked about the ongoing planning to manage conservation of our water source and the river watersheds. The motion will support local counties and municipal governments' ongoing efforts to preserve the headwater regions in their area. It will also support the work of groups like the North Saskatchewan River Watershed Alliance, whose mandate is to ensure our water security in areas like the Capital Region. There's also a group like Riverwatch that works hard on our river, working with youth groups and the education sector to make sure that all young people understand the importance of the headwaters and the river and how to preserve the water for our use. So, Mr. Speaker, I would really like to urge all members to support this motion and to support the government to increase its efforts to conserve and manage public lands in Alberta, headwater region, to optimize downstream water security for future generations of Alberta. I think this motion is going to go towards a long way to supporting groups like the Watershed Alliance, Riverwatch, Clearwater County, and all groups that have worked really, really hard to preserve the headwaters and our rivers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Calgary Northern Hills.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to Motion 511 as brought forward by the member from Banff Cochrane. Our government is committed to building long-term watershed resiliency for flood and drought mitigation by improving natural watershed functions and by engaging Albertans in the conservation, restoration, enhancement, and stewardship of our priority watersheds. Water is one of the most important resources, and Alberta has some of the most significant headwaters in Western Canada. Our eastern slope watersheds are the source of water for 3 prairie provinces. Water flows from the Rocky Mountains eastward to the Hudson Bay, with legal agreements between our provinces for how we share this life-giving natural resource. Water connects us all. Mr. Speaker, we depend on our eastern slope watersheds to provide water of good quality, in sufficient quantity, with suitable timing of flow. Timing of flow relates to the right quantities of water arriving at the right time, rather than a flood of too much or a drought of too little. Water is the common denominator for life, and timing of flow is of special concern to millions of Albertans. When we speak of headwater conservation, we typically think of waters as being in our rivers. Yet the water in our rivers actually comes from the landscape. Precipitation makes its way over and through the landscape on its way to our rivers. And this water runs off the surface or percolates through soils. It picks up traces of whatever is occurring on that landscape, delivering the effects of land use into our rivers, where they can be carried downstream to millions of Albertans depending on this water supply. Whatever we do to the landscape, we do to the water. And whatever we do to the water, we do to ourselves. This is the reason for headwaters protection. Our watersheds are under increasing pressure to serve a growing population, a population that uses more water for domestic and industrial purposes than ever before, while that same population frequents our headwater landscapes with a heavier footprint than ever before, a footprint that includes both industrial and recreational uses. Most of our headwater landscapes are found on Alberta's public lands, lands heavily used by Albertans in three main industries, lands also heavily used by Albertans seeking recreational opportunities. Public lands are held in trust by the government for all Albertans. Activities on this landscape matter, particularly as they relate to watershed health. The management of human behavior in headwater regions has a direct connection to securing our water quality, water quantity, and timing of flow. The Government of Alberta is currently taking action to care for our public lands in a way, our headwater landscapes, through an increased enforcement and education presence upon public lands, an increased commitment of fire risk management, investment into campgrounds, and other much-needed infrastructure on public lands, recreational trail repair, and bridge building, management of linear densities, recreational management planning, sub-regional land use planning, completion of a biodiversity management framework, and ongoing oversight of forest management planning activities. Our government continues to fund the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program, providing $18.5 million for 35 projects furthering healthy watersheds, many located in Alberta headwaters, to help optimize downstream water security for Albertans. At a time when climate change threatens to disrupt our reliance on known precipitation patterns, it is especially prudent to optimize the health of our headwaters. Well-managed landscapes with healthy watershed systems will help Albertan communities adapt to climate change, in which severe weather and unexpected precipitation patterns become more common. Protecting our headwaters and ensuring our future water security is absolutely necessary for us, the residents in Calgary Northern Hills, or the ridings downstream from the eastern slopes, and in addition to that, our economic prosperity. Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting in favour of this motion because protecting our land and waters is the right thing to do for ourselves and for future generations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, and thank you for the member from Banff Cochrane for bringing it forward.
Thank you. The honourable member for Grand Prairie Smoky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Motion 511. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge the government to increase its efforts to conserve and manage public lands in Alberta's headwater regions to optimize downstream water security for future generations of Albertans. Mr. Speaker, we certainly agree that managing water is a very important issue and that we can always strive to be more effective in how we manage our water. Now, the suggestion from the member from Banff Cochrane that Wildrose has a do-nothing approach on this matter, it couldn't be further from the truth.
It is ridiculous.
In fact, it is of such great importance that it is something Wildrose has always stood for. I will be only too happy to outline how so, namely our caucus's existing environment policy, which includes the following points under the heading Clean Water. Implement independently conducted water quality testing for all industrial projects to ensure downstream water quality is unaffected. Ensure all groundwater connected to fracking and other drilling is independently tested before and after to ensure landowners are not adversely affected. Develop a comprehensive on- and off-stream freshwater plan to ensure Alberta's agriculture producers, developers and residents have access to the clean water needed for quality of life and economic growth. Promote improved water conservation by eliminating regulations that make it impossible for developers to implement new conservation technologies, such as grey water recycling for residential or commercial use. Pardon me. Design and implement a water use strategy that ensures adequate supplies of water for food production and enables our small urban and rural communities to develop and grow as they see fit. Ensure that all Alberta municipalities are able to provide safe and reliable drinking water to their population and that proper sewage treatment practices are followed. Now, the crux of the motion is to urge the government pardon me, to optimize downstream water security, and that's good. In our caucus, quite a few MLAs are active in the outdoors. We have a love of fishing and hunting and believe that, like us, the tens of thousands of Albertans that support fish and wildlife through purchasing of hunting and fishing licenses are strong stewards of the land. This point has been reiterated by government members many times over the last 18 months as well. All of us know that protecting our headwaters are not only crucial for maintaining healthy fisheries and our ecosystems, but for clean water for our communities and the businesses that rely on it. Now, while our position seems to closely align with what I believe the member opposite is trying to achieve with this motion, I would be remiss if I was to neglect bringing up some of our concerns. Several of my colleagues have expressed a certain unease with some of the vagueness in the language in this motion, in particular where the motion speaks to government increasing its efforts to conserve and manage public lands in Alberta's headwaters regions. Pardon me. As I said at the outset, we can always improve the effectiveness of our efforts. But too often, with this government, their approach to every issue is to throw red tape and more bureaucrats at it with no regard for what it does to kill jobs in Alberta. I'll note at the outset that in general, current environmental regulations, the Alberta Land Use Framework, and even the Federal Fisheries Act are world-leading, and I would certainly like to hear what exactly this member finds deficient. Now, if we look at the Alberta Water Act, it says the purpose of this act is to support and promote the conservation and management of water, including the wise allocation and use of water, while recognizing the need to manage and conserve water resources, to sustain our environment, and to ensure a healthy environment and quality of life in the present and the future. The need for Alberta's economic growth and prosperity. The need for an integrated approach and comprehensive, flexible administration and management systems based on sound planning, regulatory actions, and market forces. The shared responsibility of all residents of Alberta for the conservation and wise use of water and their role in providing advice with respect to water management, planning, and decision-making. The importance of working cooperatively with the governments of other jurisdictions with respect to transboundary water management. Pardon me. The important role of comprehensive and responsive action in administrating this Act. So that's all under the Alberta Water Act. Now, the Federal Fisheries Act says this: in ecologically significant areas, if a person proposes to carry on any work, undertaking, or activity in an ecologically significant area, the person shall, on the request of the minister, or without request in the manner and circumstances prescribed by regulations made under paragraph 3A, provide the minister with any prescribed material and other information relating to the work, undertaking, or activity, or to the water, place, or fish habitat that is or is likely to be affected by the work, undertaking, or activity. Now, in the same Federal Fisheries Act, under the powers of the minister, number 2, if after reviewing any material or information provided under subsection 1 or 1.1 and affording the persons who provided it a reasonable opportunity to make representations, the minister or person designated by the minister is of the opinion that an offence under subsection 41 or 2 is being or likely to be committed, or that the work, undertaken, or activity results or is likely to result in harm to fish in an ecologically significant area, the minister or the designated person may, by order, subject to subject to regulations made under paragraph 3BA, require any modifications or additions to the work, undertaking, or activity, or any modifications to plans, specifications, procedures, or schedules relating to it that the minister or the designated person considers necessary in the circumstances, or B, restrict the carrying on of the work, undertaking, or activity. The minister or designated person may also direct the closing of the work or undertaking or the ending of the activity for any period that the minister or designated person considers necessary in the circumstances. So we can clearly see there's already a pretty good amount of regulation and restrictions on things happening that it could affect the water in Alberta. Now, so yes, we can always be more effective, but effectiveness means doing better for both the environment and jobs. So we know how crucial access to water is for our farming and ranching communities, and any changes that may come forth from this motion cannot mean breaking existing grazing leases or water licenses, and it must be said we will fight hard against any attempt by the NDP government to take any such action. While on the subject of business, I should point out we also have a tremendous amount of resources in our mountains, and there is no reason we can't develop them responsibly and be responsible stewards of our headwaters. So let me be perfectly clear. I hope this motion does not mean any kind of future blanket ban on development near the headwaters, be it agriculture, forestry, or industrial. There must be a proper balance between the environment and Alberta's economy at all times. This government is already killing jobs every time they announce a new economic policy, and I certainly hope that any policies developed from this motion are cognizant of that fact. Our forests in particular need a responsible management plan, and that plan includes harvesting trees, even if it is a select harvest in conjunction with fire smart or even pine beetle strategies. Protecting a forest from responsible harvesting is not protecting a forest. It's quite the opposite. The pine beetle population in BC exploded because it was in a protected forest and the trees got old and weak and were vulnerable to infestation. In addition, our mountain forests are vulnerable to forest fires, and old forests that are not harvested will burn eventually and will burn big, not only just as we've seen in the fire in Fort McMurray and in Slave Lake, but in the eastern slopes near Hillcrest and the Crow's Nest Pass, that happened not too long ago also. This could be devastating to many of our most vulnerable areas, and forestry should be based on proper modeling and not ideology. As we have seen in the Castle area, not far from the Crow's Nest Pass, we have a case of logging companies being forced out of contracts with little recourse at the whim of government. Any future strategy should not mean turning wilderness areas into parks. We have a lot of protected park areas in our mountains. Companies also need to have access to parts of the mountains to responsibly develop our natural resources. For instance, the Alberta export of metallurgical coal is some of the best in the world. It's essential for steel, and an export that we need to responsibly develop. There are concerns that this motion is but a prelude to further actions against Alberta's already reeling coal industry. I hope that this is not the member's intent. Development of resources and the environment can occur in concert. In fact, a business in my area is exploring new techniques to make sure that any encroachment on sensitive ecosystems are impacted in a less intrusive way. We can develop resources and maintain healthy headwaters. The place that I'm talking about here is the Evergreen Centre for Resource Excellence and Innovation. And here they have a part of the area just outside Grand Prairie set apart just for studying the effects of industry on stream beds, on wetlands, and on soil.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members who would like to speak to motion number 511? Seeing and hearing none, I would offer the member from Banff Cochrane 5 minutes to close. Close debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In closing debate today, I'd like to thank members for their input on this critical policy issue. I'd also like to thank all of those who helped me fully appreciate the way that land use practices affect water quantity and quality and assisted me in crafting this motion. These are people like Sharon McDonald, Kevin Van Tegum, Bob Sanford, Dr. John Pomeroy, Harvey Locke, Stephen Legault, Gord McMahon, Bill Motherwell, Heinz and Marilyn Unger, Fritz and Hannah Seidel, Hugh Pepper, Judy Stewart, and groups like Yellowstone to Yukon, the Nature Conservancy, the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society, the Bragg Creek Environmental Coalition, the Elbow River Watershed Partnership, and all of the others who I haven't mentioned who have made water their life's work. These individuals and groups work tirelessly to raise awareness that the way in which we manage our landscape affects the common denominator that is water. Just in response to some of the comments that were brought up during the debate today, people asking what kinds of things that I would like to see as a result of this motion, I can name two that are quite salient. I think one would be the protection of West Slope cutthroat trout, which are an endangered species, and there's a federal protection order for those fish. Some of the practices that occur in our headwaters can place those fish at risk, and I would like to make sure that we don't lose another species. That's at risk here. Another one is that there's an international goal for countries to reach 17% of their land base as protected spaces. And Alberta is quite short of that. We're doing good work and we have a little ways to go. But looking at some past reports, I was surprised to hear the member for Calgary-Lougheed say that he won't support the motion. But it's not surprising to me because the action of his government when they were in government was described as dismal when it came to conserving protected spaces. So we've got a long way to go there. And I know that the previous government really watered down their commitment to protecting spaces, but we've protected, we've shown action on this file. We've protected the Castle Wilderness area, and there's lots of other activities that we can make sure that we're doing to add and work towards that 17% goal. I'd like to just talk about the way that water is a prerequisite for a strong economy. And I know the member for Calgary Mountain View pointed this out. If we're not managing our water, we're not managing our economy. And I think that's a very powerful statement, Mr. Speaker. And one example that we can turn to here in Alberta that demonstrates that quite clearly is the example of the town of Okotoks. Now, I know that the town of Okotoks has done a very good job in managing the water that they've got, but they've reached the limit of their water allocation, and they're worried that their economy can't grow. So they've taken real concrete steps to address this issue, and they're looking at solutions, and I applaud them in their work. But this is a situation that illustrates to us that if water is restricted, we can't grow our economy. And that's a state that I don't want to see Alberta in, which is why I proposed this motion. I'm hoping down the road, 100 years from now, someone will say, "Hey, I'm glad we took water seriously because our economy and our environment is better for it today." I also think, the member for Calgary Mountain View mentioned side benefits of this motion, and one of those is tourism. Tourism is great, is one of our top economic drivers in the province, and the type of places that tourists like to go are to these protected spaces and national parks and provincial parks. And this is something that we can be very proud of, Mr. Speaker, that we have these places that people from all across the world want to come to Alberta to see. And so not only does this help with water, in terms of water, but it also helps our economy in terms of tourism. So with all that said, Mr. Speaker, I think we've had some really good debate here today. I'm a little bit surprised to see that the official opposition isn't going to be supporting the motion, but it doesn't surprise me because the leader of the official opposition, when under Stephen Harper, they took away protection from hundreds of lakes and rivers across Canada. And so it doesn't really surprise me that they don't take water seriously, and that's certainly not any kind of advice that I want to take from them. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the debate today, and I look forward to voting on this.
On the motion as proposed by the honourable member for Banff Cochrane, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Motion is passed.